Okay, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, for giving this opportunity, and welcome to this session called Azure SQL Database Lesson Learned from the Strangers. My name is Jose Manuel Jurado. I am escalation engineer working in Microsoft, based on Madrid, Spain. You have my detailed contact here. About my background is I'm supporting right now several databases, let's say SQL database, managed instance, MySQL, MariaDB, and Postgres, working all running in the Azure platform as a services. I have been working Microsoft for more than 9 years, and I used to work with multiple customers like DevOps, the startups, developers, etc. I am speaker in another events, let's say SQL Saturday, Tech Ready, and also I worked previously in with different roles in different companies, let's say DBA, developer, IT manager, for more than 25 in other companies, not Microsoft, in other companies. So also I support SQL Server. So I have several expertise developer, and when I saw the opportunity to deliver a session as for developers, was my first question. No, the first question is why this session? Well, first of all, it's based on support tickets, working with developers and DBAs and IT managers. I have seen working in these type of cases. I have seen, let's say, not mistake, but errors. Let's say mistake, errors, issues that I would like to share with you. For the reason was the idea about the lesson learned from the stretches. So when I'm working with developers, I have learned multiple things that I would like to share with you in two scenarios. But I would like to resume, let's say, or have a summary about the session in 3 different concepts. It's when you are working in Azure, normally the main idea is to run fast. That means that reduce the cost, okay? Because you know that when you build an application, develop an application, you could think about, okay, I'm going to have a big server. I don't take care about the hardware that I have, just only write my code, and that's all. In Azure, that multiple things you are going to pay by the use for the use that you are going to use. It's very important. It's very important to try to pay less in order to have more. To have more. So let's say that you are going to have a benefit. So if you run faster or you run your application very fast, at the end, you are going to reduce several costs. Okay, it's very important because for the reason it's the session that I'm going to show you how to, for example, to identify a performance query. Okay, based using and several tools or several applications I have in this case. Other things is the resilience. So what that mean? That means that for sure, when you are working a cloud environment, that you have in some place you have the client machine. When you have your application in another space, you have your SQL server or your MySQL server, your Postgres server, etc. At the end, you need to think about several things. It's about the connectivity. Sometimes could happen something, for example, that the server needs to be restarted because we need to apply and service pack, or you have a problem in your application. So it's very important. It's very important that your application to be more resilient in terms of these things. So I'm going to show you in another scenario how of the best practice and how to avoid, for example, these type of issues. So, and finally, I would like to other topic, other term. It's about reliable. So what does mean this? That means that, okay, for sure, you are every application you have the maintain cycle. So that means that you need to implement your code, test your code, running your code, and the end you are continuously adding more options or include more options in your code. But it's very important. It's very important. Another lesson learned that I got working with developers about the telemetry. We have in Azure a lot of telemetry data. So it's very important that when you implement your code, it's not just stop here, okay, I implement the code, everything will run perfectly, but at the end it's very important, okay, to have this telemetry. This telemetry will represent if your application will run well or run with issues, or you are going to have several things. So it's very important about this sort of thing. So this is base that I'm going to show you in my lesson learned. So what is the agenda? The agenda is I'm going to show you 2 scenarios. The first scenario that we have is the typical question that we have in support, that when we receive a new case, a new service request from any customer, developers, DBA, etc. It's why my application is running slow. So right now, I'm going to show you several things, several ways that in support we are using in order to identify what happened in your code, and also how is it, or what is the tool that we have in order to, for example, to detect what is the query, what is the problem, and try to fix the issue. Try to fix the issue. Other scenario, as I mentioned before, it's about why my application times out. So when we are working with developers, we have many situations that, okay, our developers say, I have a command timeout, a connection timeout, but they don't know exactly what is these two difference. Okay, for example, command timeout. For example, suppose that depending on if you are using Java or PHP or .NET, it's very important to put focus about the message. For example, sometimes if you have login timeout, means that you have a connection timeout because you read some timeout that the application was not able to connect. Okay, or for example, when you run a query or you run a process, so you could receive, for example, the wait timeouts. Okay, so that means that was the execution. So it's very important when you are trying to identify what happened, is try to put the focus about this. Other things that we are going to discuss, and I'm going to show you several examples. It's about how to measure the network latency. We are going to review several points that I have in C# or using several options like stopwatch in .NET in order to detect what is the network latency that I have. Okay, and finally, I'm going to share with you the coding best practice. It's how it's the main things that you need to think about when you are when you are developing your application. It's very important to follow up these instructions in order to, as I mentioned before, to run fast and to be reliable and resilient about any error that could happen. Okay, so right now, as I mentioned, we are going to go in this scenario. So I'm going to switch to the demo. Let me show you an example, a real example. This is one case that I received, and the customer was running without any issue from, let's say, for more than 1 year, but unexpectedly something happened. And the application that normally every action, every line that you have, every transaction that you have, this customer saw that it's running very, very, very slow. So as you can see, they say, okay, I don't know what happened. So what is my problem? The problem that we have, for example, when I receive this case is, do you have your own telemetry data? They say, no, I did this, I don't know what happened. So in this case, my main idea was using, for example, Visual Studio, is the profile of Visual Studio, is try to find what is the part of the code, okay, that is causing this problem. So I'm going to stop right now the application. As you could see, I used to, every time that I have a case, I would like to create a proof of concept. For the reason, as you could see here, you could see many classes that I have for many issues for different cases that I was previously. So in this case, I have one application. Basically, this application is running around 100,000 transaction, again, one application. And right now I don't have any telemetry data. I'm going to use the pooling, okay? And the best thing is, okay, let's try to identify if it could be possible for sure. If it could be possible to know what is the part of the code that is causing the problem, okay? So I'm going to go to the back, run the profiler, click start, using the basic things without any more activity. I'm going to use the instrumentation part. And run the process. So right now, this application will run, and I'm going to run, for example, just only 10 transactions. It's running right now. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's wait for just only until we reach 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay. Okay. So as you can see right now, in this profiler, I have several information that was very useful for me. Is try to identify what happened. As you can see right now, running this application, I saw two things. First is the 50% of the execution right now was around 21 seconds. The half of the part of this execution was using a sleep. I did by, for an example, I'm going to remove this. And also we have that running the db command SQL scalar is also another half or another 15 in this execution. So right now, in this, I found two things. It seems that, for example, part of the code, part of this class is doing something that is not related with the database that is causing, let's say, a performance issues. And also, I saw that right now, running any specific query is taking time. So my main idea, I'm going to, for example, I'm going to go to the classes, to this class, and I'm going to remove, as I mentioned before, I did just only, for an example, I'm going to remove this sleep, okay? So if I run again, the profiler, for sure that we are going to see different behaviors, that most probably the information that we are going to have it's basically, it seems that we'll run just only a SQL command statement. Okay, so right now, what is the lesson learned? It's very important when you have a performance problem is try to identify that if the problem is the code, when, for example, you retrieve the data, or when you're running a query. Okay, so it seems that I'm going to just only wait for the next executions. Okay, I'm going to stop here. As you can see right now, it's clear that the 90% of this part is basically the execution of the query. So right now, it's clear that something happened with the database, right? So, but what is the query that I am executing? So right now, we have two things in order to identify this. One thing is try to add my main code. For example, I would like to in this class, for example, you could use, for example, I used to recommend to use a stopwatch just only to measure what is the time of the execution for different process. Also, most probably you know, we have application insights. It's another internal telemetry data that explain with more details what happened in your code, and also you could add your main code, okay? So, for example, I would like to add my own code in terms of internal telemetry data, and I add several details. For example, using the SQL connection object, we have an option that is called statistics. So when you run a query and you enable these statistics, like using this parameter, this property, and the end, you could have some details about what happened with my connection, or for example, what happened with the execution time of my query. So I'm going to, for example, enable these metrics. I'm going to run again the application. As you can see here, right now, I have a lot of very useful information in terms of execution, executing this query. The first things, if I have the ID connection, it's very important. When you have a problem in terms to establish the connection, normally all the drivers, when you're connected to the SQL Azure or managed instance, and the end you have an ID connection. ID connection is very important because also with this information, you could share this information with my colleagues in support and say, okay, I have a problem, I got, or I had, or I faced this problem in this connection. Also, this is the bytes that I received, that received the application, sorry, the data that we received, the bytes that I sent, okay? And also in terms of execution. So how much time spent in order to execute this query, okay? And one thing that also it's very important, it's about, for example, is the network server time, okay? It's how much time took in order to connect to the server that is right now is in West Europe. I'm based in Madrid. Right now I'm working from home. And okay, I took, for everything, I took 900 milliseconds. So at the end, I have a lot of information that, okay, it seems that something happened, okay? So for the reason, for every query that I have this information. The last part that I would like to show you is these two last line. These two last line, basically the idea that I have is the time that when my code, the function or the part of my code works, including the execution of this SQL command statement. Okay, it's very important because I would like to understand if my problem is just solely basically the query, or something I have in my code that is not working well. Okay, so we identify this situation and how I could understand what is this query. Okay, so the idea is, for sure, if you are a developer and not a DBA, for sure that, one second, let me maintain the application running. Keep it running. Okay, that's right. The main idea is normally you are going to say, okay, you are going to contact with your DBA team. Okay, we have this query we have a problem with this query. Please review this. Sometimes, depending on the company, we don't have this group, or we don't have a pure DBA. So at the end, the developer, we have a mix of roles. Sometimes we have developer is a DBA, the DBA is a developer, etc. So I would like to show you several aspects, okay, in order to identify what happened, okay, basically using two tools, okay. Well, I'm going to say three tools. The first thing is the portal, okay. For example, you could see that this is my database. The database right now, as you could see right now, it's using right now 80% of 80% or 100% of the DTU. Forget about the DTU. I would like to show you one topic about the real thing about the CPU. At the end, in SQL Azure, you have two different tiers, database tiers. You have DTU model and vCore model. I choose the DTU because I would like to show you in reality what happened. At the end, DTU is no more than the max value for 3 counters. It's CPU, IO, or data IO, log IO, or data IO. For example, right now, as you can see, I'm going to use CPU percentage. I'm going to add a data IO percentage, and I'm going to add right now a log IO percentage. So in the end, I'm going to remove the DTU because that is not needed. Okay. And the end, right now, I saw that, okay, in terms of data IO, it seems that I don't have any problem, but it seems that my problem is the CPU. So it seems that at least this query is taking too much time or taking a lot of resources. Okay, so right now also if you are using, for example, a SQL Server Management Studio, you have other views like this one that you are going to have more or less the same data that you have. Okay, so as you can see here right now, the amount of data that you have here is okay. Right now, my database is running. It's clear that I have a problem in terms of CPU. Okay, we have other tools. We have SQL auditing. We have profiler, not a profiler that we could that we have in SQL Server Profiler, but we have other ways in order to capture also the execution of the query. But I don't want to go to this because just only I would like to show you basic things in order to detect the query. Okay, so right now I found that I have a problem running my query. Okay, so what is the next step? Is try to identify what is this query. In this situation, thanks to the several options that we have in Azure, you could see we have a performance overview, automatic tuning, and performance recommendation. So I'm going to start from the bottom about the automatic tuning. So at the end, if you are a developer and you don't want to be or it's not your main interest about the DVA, so you could enable several things in order to speed up your application. Is given the decisions to create indexes or drop indexes or for the plans directly to Azure SQL Engine. So the main idea doing this is that if after, for example, 2 or 3 days that your application is running, if this and you have on this option, SQL will start try to analyze the data based on this workload and try to make some suggestions about, okay, you need to create indexes here, you need to drop index because your application is not using this one, etc. For the reason, based on these things, I have some performance recommendations that, as you could see here, is basically if I need to create some indexes or not. So I don't know what happened is I think that we are going to have, but anyway. But right now, I don't have, suppose that right now, let me, if it could be possible to obtain again the data. If not, much probably I need to refresh 1 second. Okay, anyway. Okay, let me to stop because most probably it's taking too much. Second. So in the end, right now I don't have any, I don't know what happened, sorry, in this demo. Let me just only to try for a couple of seconds to use the portal using other browser. Sorry. Okay, 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 it's an error. Okay, something happened. Okay, anyway. So at the end, I don't know what happened, but the idea that I have is I'm going to have here some information about the queries that I'm running, okay? And also I'm going to have some charts about every query that I have, what is the CPU consumptions that I have for this query, okay? Or for example, in terms of CPU, in terms of I/O, in terms of everything. If I click in the different lines that I have here, that as I mentioned, I don't know what happened, you are going to see what is the text of the query that represent this CPU usage. In another hand, we could use, for sure, we could use other tool. It's, for example, one tool that we know that is called Query Store, okay? Query Store is an option that we have in SQL by default. It's enabled by default in all databases that you have in SQL Azure and also in managed instance. You could disable or disable this option. And also, we have several reports. One of these reports is, for example, query weight statistics. Query weight statistics, the main things that you are going to have is, okay, the main weight stats that you have is you have CPU, data I/O, etc. Log, for example, you know that could happen some blocking issues, etc. So at the end, right now, there is no need to configure. For example, if you want to know what happened 2 days ago, you could modify the time interval in order to retrieve the data, etc. Okay, but in this case, it's a live issue. So the main idea is it's clear that right now, the total time for this number of executions that I have, for example, 1,200 executions is taking this time. And also, if I choose the average time, they mentioned that every query that I'm running in CPU is taking around 900 milliseconds. So if I click here, you are going to have multiple queries that is taking time. So this is the query that is taking time. As you could see here, it's very simple. It's basically or for example, this one is other query. At the end, basically the idea is something happened about in this execution that is taking too much time. Also, you could see two things. First, it's when you have the cycle, means that the execution was completed. Another one is the execution was canceled. Okay, but beside that, the execution plan, because this is not the purpose of this session, it's about to try to review what happened. For example, it's clear that I'm reading all the rows. So, for example, the performance bar car where the text to search is equal value. I would like to put focus in two things. First, the normal thing is do I need, for example, an index? So in this case, I'm going to go to the table that most probably, normally, if we have a missing index, you are going to have here an advice about, okay, you need to create an index. But right now, we don't have this index, or we have this index already created, but it's still running a performance problem. If I go to this table, this performance, okay, varchar, I'm expanding indexes, and as you can see here, I have an index that is related that right now is rated about the text to search, but it seems that I don't need the index. So, but I have a warning message here. It seems that one was the lesson learned that I have with this customer. Okay, So right now we have a message. They mentioned that, okay, it seems that the parameter that you are using in order to execute this query, it's not the data type that is not the same data type that you have in your table. Okay, for this reason, SQL needs to run, let's say, and convert implicit in order to convert right now, for example, to right now, if you could see the data type of this field is varchar, they need to convert. If you're using mvarchar, they need to convert to varchar. So what is the impact about it? The first impact is we are not using seek. Seek is the most efficient way to retrieve the data, because basically it's when you have an index, I'm going directly to the data. But right now I'm using one thing that is called a scan. A scan means that I'm going to read all the rows that you have, okay, all the data that you have. For the reason, I found that when the customer ran this query, every time is running is reading all the rows, 400,000 rows, and they need to convert this thing. So if I copy, for example, this text, that is very simple to copy the text. If I, for example, if you want to obtain basically the execution plan, basically you need to enable this option in your SQL 7 Management Studio. Also, you could use SQL Data Studio or SQL Data Studio, other tool that you have. And also, you could see here, there's an execution plan. As you could see, it's taking around 2 seconds. Okay, so we have a convert implicit. So right now, it seems that if I go back, it seems that our customer or the application is using N. N means Unicode. Unicode, you know, that is a double byte that if you, when you are not using not Unicode. So if I copy the query in order just only to fix this issue, is I'm going to replace this thing, removing this letter. That means that I'm using Unicode. So I'm going to execute again. And as you can see here, the execution took a few milliseconds, and I'm using index-seek, okay, because I'm using the right data type that I have in my table, okay? So what was the lesson learned in this situation? The lesson learned is this customer, in the definition of the table, in this or other ones, the customer used varchar, but in reality, the code is using Unicode for every place that they have in this application. So in reality, the problem was more than the conversion implicit that you have, more than the real problem about the database. So in this situation, my recommendation, we have the data right now. I don't know what happened, but as you could see here, using the portal, you could see the graphic that I mentioned before. It's okay, these queries, for example, right now, these queries is taking this time. So also you have the queries, a summary of the queries that is taking too much time, okay? And as I mentioned before, if you click here, you could see the text, okay? So, you have all the times, all the information that you have thanks to this application. So in these situations, I go back to the application and I ask, please stop your application. Let's go to tuple and please remove the incorrect data type that you are using. Okay, when we remove these sort of things, as you could see right now, even using the internal telemetry data, so you could see right now that the execution time is just a pure connection, because as you could see here, the execution is 36 milliseconds, and the network is 35 milliseconds, and the end is a pure execution. So it's a pure network give you the data, give me the data, and also you could see the difference. So what was the lesson learned? The lesson learned was this, okay, it's very important when you have this type of things is, as we mentioned, try to add your internal telemetry data or try to use application insight, try to review if your code is using the same data type that you have in the tables, etc. If you're not able to find these things, basically following the same thing that I showed you previously, you have let's say the way to identify what happened in your code. We have other ways, but I would like to show you an example about it. Okay, so just only to finish this scenario, it's also in the similar way that you have in your web app application, cloud service application, etc. Remember that you have alerts. Okay, alerts. You could create some alerts based on the CPU usage of your database, based on the data that you have. You could create based on one specific threshold. You could receive some message about, okay, the CPU of the database is taking too much time, etc. Other things, this is the last tool that I'm going to show you about the internal telemetry data in terms of performance. So you know that in Azure you have application insight, but also you have other thing that is called diagnostic settings. Diagnostic settings receive the data from the application insights. Also, we have the integrations for your database. Okay, so for example, right now, if I use these diagnostics, for if you want to review what happened in your database for a long time, what happened previously, you have this report that that you could have a lot of information about what happened with my database, what happened with my report. You have several links to move on between screens, okay, and also for other ones that they want to run their own code or their own requests or queries, you have one language, one query language that is called Custo. Okay, so at the end, you could, for example, run not just only for application insight, as I mentioned before, it's also for, one second, it's also, for example, the Custo query. Custo query is basically the idea that is behind is in application insight, storage, SQL, all the service that we have, the internal telemetry data that we have will save in just in this workspace, and using the report that you have by default or these queries, you could obtain a lot of information about what happened yesterday, today, or run your own filters. Okay, it's this Custo query is a huge it's an other language very similar, and the end is very similar with like you could have in SQL, because at the end you need to specify, for example, the table and specify the where, and also summarize. Let's say that is more or less is a group by, and render at the end is a time chart. Okay, it's how you are going to represent the data. So this is the scenario that, as you can see, let's say that I'm not going to say it was very simple because it takes time, but it's how just only implement your code and implement or using the tools that you have already without to be an expert DVA, etc. You could find what is the problem in your code. Okay, so I don't know if you have any question about this first scenario before moving on to another scenario. It seems that not. Okay. So the second scenario that we mentioned before is about why my applications stand out. Okay. So in this situation, in many cases that we have, besides, as I mentioned before about the command timeout, execution timeout, etc., it's the basic things or the best practice that your application could save a lot of time. Okay, for example, let me show you an example. I'm going to use another application, another part of the application. As I mentioned, I did several for this presentation. 1 second is here. I have another application that to show you several things. For example, we have cases that our customers say, okay, the connection time spent in order to connect the server I think that is taking too much time, right? So in this case, it's very important that mention that, for example, if you are using pooling or not. For example, let me show you an example. What is the impact when you specified in your connection stream one thing that is called connection pooling? Right now, I'm not using the connection pooling. As you could see, this is every time that you are seeing one line in a single thread. I'm not using multiple thread in my application. I have other example, but it's taking this time. Okay. Also, we could see, for example, how much time. 1 second. Okay, 1 second here. I need to add another one. It's a network time. Yeah. So right now, as you can see, the network time, it's taking around this time, 200 milliseconds all the time. So as you can see here, it's taking several times milliseconds in order to establish the connection. What happened if I use connection pooling? Let's say I'm going to enable the connection pooling in my connection string, okay? And also if I run, so right now I'm taking less time because also this connection pooling, let's say that we are going to cache the connections, okay? Even using connection pooling, using Java, other languages have this connection pooling. But what happened when my code have an error and I not close the connection correctly? Or I have an error that I open the connection, but I never close the connections. So I'm going to receive right now a message that is called this message. That means that time now expire. The time now expire, obtain the connection pooling. Right now, if I try to connect to my database, for example, to run again this query, it seems that it's working. So come on, something happened with my database. No, the problem that you have is when you enable the connection pooling and you are not closing the connection correctly, or you are not managing the error handling correctly, and the end you are leaving, let's say, this connection open. So at the end, you are going to reach one situation that you are going to reach the limit that I have in max pool, okay, that is causing an error, okay? This is very important because right now the problem is not, let's say, the application, the database. It's about the application it's not closing correctly the connection. What happened if I, for example, close the connection? I close the connection even when we have any error. So as you could see here, if I close explicitly in this application, okay, as you could see, the time it's very fast. Right now, you could see the connection. It's really amazing. Okay, so for the reason, it's very important. What was my lesson learned in this type of cases? Use pooling, if it could be possible, in the driver. review if something happened to be sure that you close the connection, etc. Okay, it's very important about it. So again, so we could add more internal telemetry data for sure. Okay, for example, using, for example, .NET, it's possible, for example, to obtain data, for example, about the number of connection pooling that I have open, already open. So right now, as you could see, for example, in my application that is called .NET example, right now I obtain in the performance counter that I have in my machine. Right now I have, okay, you have an active connections, you have how many connections that you have per second, what is the number of connection pool that you have, okay? So at the end also, I'm saving this data. I'm doing other, I also in this code, I add any other test, including tests if the port is open, etc. Okay, it's very important just only because as much I can in order to add internal telemetry data, more quicker I'm going to find what is the problem in terms of connectivity. Okay, so for example, I add initial check. That means that every time that I establish the connection, I try to open the port running a telnet command, for example, in order that, okay, the port is open or not. Let me just only share with you two examples that are very common when we are working with developer when we have some problems in terms of connectivity. The first thing that is very important, as I mentioned before, it's about one thing that is called retry logic. So what does mean? Retry logic. Let me, so 1 second, yeah, 1 second. Let me to just only stop the performance counter because it's taking time and I don't want, my main interest is to show you. As you can see, we are connecting to the database. We are going to read, right now, I'm not closing the connection, so I'm going to have a problem, okay? When I read 50, I'm going to read one situation that SQL or the client is not able to open more connection because we reach the maximum capacity of the connection pooling that by default is 100, but you could modify this, okay? And right now, I'm not able to connect. After reach the connection timeout, I receive an error. What happened in this situation? Or not just only this example. Suppose that we are running a reconfiguration of your server or your database because we add a new option or we need to apply a new service pack, etc. So the most important thing when you are working in Azure is try to use retry logic. Retry logic is not more than to add, let's say, a logic in order that if something happened in the connection, instead to, let's say, give an error, close the application and we have an error, is let's try to retry the connection again. But immediately, no. The main idea is, for example, is try to wait, for example, let's say 5 seconds, okay? And after it, try to increase, for example, another 10, 50, 20, 25, etc. And after, when we reach one number of connection, in this case, if you are not able to connect, just for sure, the application needs to retrieve an error, say, okay, I'm not able to connect. What is the reason that is behind? Because suppose that we are running a reconfiguration. Reconfiguration means that for, let's say, no more than 10 seconds, your database was will not available in order to attend more connections, okay? In this case, normally will not take more than 30 seconds when this situation happen, okay? When we have a reconfiguration. For the reason, I used to more or less to use 10 times, okay? 10 appends in order to connect the database. And also, one thing that I used to suggest is to run the clear all pools in order to clean all the previous connection pooling that we are using. So basically, the main idea is Okay, if I'm not able to connect, try to connect. If not, retry the connection. And also, for me, it's very important to know the errors. We have some errors that is clear that retrying the connection will be fine. Or if we have any error, for example, I don't know, that in this such situation, it's clear that you need to raise an error about it. Okay, so it's very important. Retry logic, for sure. Every application that you have in Azure needs to have retry logic. Okay. The last thing that I would like to show you about the connectivity, it's about one thing that we used to see very frequently. It's about, suppose that I'm not using the connection pooling. And open the connection, you know that it's taking sometimes, but what happened when I'm not, I have an error, I'm not using connection pooling, but I open the connections, but without closing the connection. Let me show you what happened. Let's wait for, let's say 20. Yeah, okay. So as you can see here, you have this line, okay? I create these two lines. What does mean this line? This line means that the connection that I have opened against my server beside the 22, I have 160. Okay, I have established 300. In the time wait is 61. But as you can see, if I'm not closing the connection that is established will be increment, let's say, okay? So without control, okay? So in this situation, something happened that we are going to reach one situation that will occur two things. Or you reach the maximum capacity of the concurrent connections that you have for your database, or you are going to exhaust all the resources in terms of TCP socket that you have in your server. Okay, we have many message about when we reach these exhaustions. Okay, we have sometimes catastrophic failures. You don't have enough memory for the TCP socket. We don't have this thing. Normally, our customers mention that, okay, I closed up my application, but when I close the application, everything works fine again. It's clear, because when I close the application, all the ports that I have open will be closed again. Okay, for the reason, again, so it's very important. It's very important that the retry logic and also how you manage your errors. Okay, the possible failures. It's very important about it. Not just only for the connection, even for the executions. Okay, about it. So we are going to reach one situation that most probably we are going to receive. Meanwhile, most probably we receive this error. I would like to show you other things. For example, using, for example, Java. What is the retry logic that I have in Java? Again, the same. My main idea was to create a special class that I have in C# that I'm going to retry the connection. I'm going to retry the connection, and also the main idea that I have in this code, it's also about to know how much time took my query. Okay, as you could see, I'm connecting to the database, running some queries. For example, as you can see here, I have an error because, as I mentioned before, my C# is running. It's we reach the maximum number of concurrent connections that I have for this database tier. Right now, my applications are not able to connect because even I'm not able to connect because my problem is I reach 600 concurrent connections. I'm not closing anything, and I'm going to have the same problem for other applications, and also I'm going to have the same problem for example, let's say for PHP. If I run my PHP situation, as you could see, I'm going to have the same message. Okay, so what is as I mentioned, the lesson learned is try to implement the retry loop. I'm going to stop the application, most probably right now after the retry logic that I have for PHP or that I have for Java. They are going to establish the connection again, and I could retrieve, for example, right now using PHP in terms of milliseconds. This is the time that I spent in order to connect, to run some process. And also here I add this time. So it's very important when you are working in these sort of things, okay? So I have more examples, but I will like just only to, before finishing this presentation, normally I used to share this best practice when you are coding about how to configure, how to prevent the problem, how to execute, or how to monitor. For example, several things for sure. The recommendation about use the protocol TCP and port 1433 for sure. Right now, SQL Azure managed instance just only reply the connection or try to connect the connection using TCP and also the port 1433. What is the recommendation? If you use TCP and the port 1433 in your connection string at the end, you're not going to you are going to receive an exact problem that you have, because if you're not using this one, most probably the error message that you're going to receive will be different, because for example, in .NET, if you're not specify the protocol, the client will try to connect using different protocols. Let's say 9 pipes, let's say 9 bytes, 10 bytes, etc. But this is the most important thing. For sure, follow up the best practice about the connection timeout. Use the connection pooling. Multiple things about try to avoid to use multiple active result sets. It's needed. So open a connection as far as possible, etc. Okay. So I think that we reached the time of the presentation. Again, if you have any question, you have my detail of contact here. You could send me an email if you need anything or you have any question. Also, I could share with you this code that contain other tests that I did, even using multiple threads. Okay. I don't know, Alan, if we have any questions.
It doesn't look like it. Let me check the Slack real quick.
Okay.
No, nothing on Slack either.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm finished on time, right? Yes, 1 hour. Okay, perfect. So again, we have many other situations, many other tests. The basic things, please, as I mentioned before, it's very important. If you want to save you money, it's very important that the developer and the DBA work together. Okay, I think that in summary, it's very important. Try to invest your time in your code. If you invest your time in your code in order to be fast, in order to run faster, and in order to manage the error that you have, I promise that you are going to pay just only the money that you need for running in Azure, working in Azure. Again, Alan, thank you so much for your time. I think that I hope that you really enjoy with this session. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity.